In the name of Christ, the Liberator. Amen. I opened up a jewelry box about 10 days ago, hoping to wear a little pendant on a chain, and what I found in the drawer was a ball of chains. Not a ball and chain, a ball of chains. Silver chains, black cord, some thick, some thin, all tangled together. And instead of just dropping in and pushing the drawer shut the way I might have done, I started to get fascinated, and I actually began to think about today's gospel passage. Because what I found was, you assume that the chains are knotted, right? We think when we first start to work with something like this, that someone has actually gone in and tied the chains in knots. So that's actually not what's happened. If you are able to open it up just a little bit, what you see is that the chains are sort of slipped around each other here and there in such a way that if you pull any one of them too hard, they will be knotted, right? But to figure out which chain is going where and how it got hooked, I actually found a brooch tangled up into it too. To figure out which chain is lying on which other chain, it made me think, work with me here, but about the difference between cause and effect and a correlation. Cause and effect is this causes that. Cause and effect is ISIS caused the killings in Orlando, or homophobia caused the killings in Orlando, or our lack of gun control laws caused the killings in Orlando. Is it true that any one of those things caused the killings in Orlando, or were they correlated? That is, several violent processes going on close to each other at the same time. That's a correlation. They're all happening at the same time, and they get tangled up together. And it becomes such a mess that if you go in assuming that you know what the cause is and you pull the wrong chain, you actually make it worse. Which is why I come to the pulpit this morning a little bit in fear and trepidation, because while our response to the Orlando shootings is passionate, more than ever we need to be patiently looking for which cords are just wrapped around each other and which ones are actually tied in knots. I did find one actual knot in that mess, but it was a small one. It was a small one. How do we know where to begin, where to enter the fray? Which is the biggest problem? Is there any low-hanging fruit? If you know what I mean. Like if you could have gotten the 100-bullet magazine away from the guy, would that have been the low-hanging fruit? But the more passionate we get about it, if you've watched Facebook threads this week, it's all happening again. People are shouting at each other on Facebook. And they're saying exactly the same things over and over again. They're saying exactly what they said out of Charleston. They're saying exactly what they said after San Bernardino. They're saying exactly what they said after Common 9. None of us has really changed our tune very much. There's not that much new in the conversation. But we hold on. We do not lose hope. The man in chains. Oh, don't you think it's a good Sunday to have a complicated gospel passage? Because this particular passage mirrors our confusion and desperation. The people in the village, this Gerasene people, we found it on the map at the edge of the Sea of Galilee in Gentile territory, they had lost all patience with this man. He had been living in the tombs, which I'm imagining were caves along the shore of the lake. A place that for Jewish people would have been considered ritually impure and unclean. And let's face it, for most of the human population, a scary place. not where you really want to be spending day and night. The gospel also tells us that he had stopped wearing clothes. Had he torn them off? Was he just not comfortable in his skin anymore? Was he trying to get rid of something? The third thing the gospel tells us is that the community had resorted to chains and shackles to try and control him. But that whatever it was that was bothering him was so intense that he would actually break the chains and run off into the wild. Now, before you go and say, well, we don't believe in demonic possession, so just put that story back in the drawer, let me remind you that there are things called systemic illnesses. If you've ever seen an adolescent with a combined, I don't know, let's make this up, a problem with drugs and school and maybe a bipolar disorder when his or her parents have completely lost control, that sense of desperation, we'll lock him in his room if we have to. Can we look at that instead? Because really what we're using here is just the ancient world's way of describing a situation where a human being is in chains, tangled chains, both inside and out. The chains are a symbol of slavery. This man is enslaved on the inside by emotions, memories, torment, rage, maybe some chemical imbalance. He's got a war going on inside himself all the time, and that war possesses him. Are we good with that? I mean, without sort of looking for the demons with the horns and stuff? You see what that could happen? And in response to that inner enslavement, the community has made it worse, probably, by adding actual metal chains. Jesus goes to the man, who, by the way, meets him as he's stepping off the boat. A light reminder that Jesus has actually been on the Sea of Galilee. As he's stepping out of the boat, the man confronts him, and then the tenses get a little confused because when we get into the conversation, Jesus has already summoned the demons and asked them to leave. He has spoken directly to the disease. You know how we say we need someone who can speak to this situation? Jesus is speaking directly to the situation in a way that no one has ever spoken to the situation before. He's got the whole mess here. Enters into the conversation, what's your name? They say, I always hear this in one of those really dark exorcist movie voices, Legion, right? Legion, for we are many. We are comorbidities. We are complicated problems. We are systemic. You can't tell what is the work of one and what is the work of the other. It is so tangled up, nobody knows what to do with us. And they ask Jesus not to send them back into the abyss where they have come from. So instead, he sends them into the pigs. And you heard the rest of the story, right? The pigs, this is terrifying. The pigs tear off into the sea, and the poor guy that was paid to take care of the pigs runs off in the other direction, telling everybody what's happened. I mean, can you imagine how he felt? How do you explain this? Mr. Employer, I lost your pigs. An itinerant healer came and sent them full of demons into the lake. Yeah, great. Good luck with that story. What happened to you over the weekend? Oh, I ran into this guy. Jesus has displaced the evil. It's one of the few stories where the illness doesn't just evaporate, right? It's not like the blind man who suddenly sees, or the deaf person who suddenly hears, or the woman whose issue of blood just stops, clears up, goes away. In this instance, the evil is so intense it actually has to go somewhere. So it goes into the pigs who go into the sea. It's ugly. Is that the reason the community wants Jesus to leave afterwards? This is the hook for me in this story. Why do they want him to leave? Luke tells us twice they want him to leave because they're afraid. The swineherd's afraid, the community is afraid. If he's done this, what else will he do? This healing has already cost the swineherd his livelihood, right? And cost the herd of pigs their lives. This is not a healing that comes free. There is a cost involved. And perhaps the community is looking at it and going, as bad as it was to have him out there in chains, I'm not so sure. Are they ready to pay the cost? Is the story holding up the mirror to us in our confusing, difficult moment and saying, what are you willing to give up to make this evil go away? To make the shooting stop? To make the violence stop? To make that explicit hatred toward gay and Latino people stop? What will it cost us to make it stop? Now, you could just follow those pigs right into the lake and say, I give up, I got nothing, right? But that's not the way the story wants us to go. Notice this little segment at the end. The swineherd comes back, and what does he see? He sees the man who had been possessed by the demons sitting at Jesus' feet, which just means like a disciple, right? Clothed and in his right mind. Clothed and in his right mind. Remember that Paul in Galatians has just said, you are clothed with Christ. There is no more Jew nor Greek, no more slave nor free, no more male nor female, but you are all one in Christ Jesus. You are all clothed with Christ. There's something about this clothing that the Gerasene demoniac was given. I don't know, the disciples had an extra outfit. I don't know how they did this. They've clothed him. Presumably they've washed him as well. He's clean, he's dressed, he's sitting up, he's not even in bed. He is clothed and in his right mind. And what does Jesus do? He wants to go with Jesus. He wants to be a disciple. He wants to get on the boat and leave that town. Jesus said, no, you don't need to do that. You don't need to bind yourself to me. You don't need to bind yourself to me. You don't need to be bound again. You're free to go. Go home and talk about what God has done for you. Go home and be that person who lost his mind and was given it again. Be that person who is clothed and in his right mind. What happens here in church when all that muck and swirl is going on outside, when you're fumbling for words to defend a position, to find a way through, to express your grief, your anguish, your sadness over what happened in Orlando or what happened in Charleston or what happened in San Bernardino? When you have all that going on around you and you feel like you can't have a piece of ground to stand on because suddenly your thoughts are a jumble and the words won't come out and you can't remember the difference between an AK-15 and an assault rifle, what then? Can we be the ones who are clothed with Christ and in our right minds? Clothed with Christ and in our right minds. And how that happens is in Jesus' encounter with the man. They are face to face, they are talking. He allows Jesus to directly address his situation. The two of them get their work done, and then he can go home and be that healed man in a town where perhaps nothing has changed yet. Nothing has changed yet. Can we be clothed with Christ and in our right mind? I did not get to meet my grandmother Harris. She died before I was born. I heard, though, that she preached well, and that her favorite hymn had these words: I want that adorning divine thou only, my God, canst bestow. I want in those garments to shine, marked out for thy household below. Take your time today. Be with Jesus here. Hold that connection close as you move through your week. And when you get dressed in the morning, remember to put on that adorning which Christ has given you. You can bring sanity to the situation. Amen.